on this episode of Headspace, where I'm here with Michael Moyo. He is one of the founding members of the mental health of the Mental Liberation Foundation. It is a starting organization that is focusing on mental health awareness, mental health activism. It's focusing on bringing out new mental health knowledge for people, and I'm happy to have him. He's actually been a long-time friend of mine. He was originally my tutor, actually. So I'm thankful to have him. I'm thankful that he's also, starting to advocate the way I have been for the past few weeks. And as for the people who have been watching Headspace regularly, I try by all means to bring in as many people with a fresh perspective as on mental health as I can. And this whole meeting itself wasn't easy to conduct because Michael's 7 hours behind us. So yeah, it was a bit hectic, but it's panned out. Hello, Michael.
Hello, Muru. How is it going?
It's fine. It's fine. You?
I'm all right. Thank you very much for having me here. Really excited, to talk about, of course, mental health and advocacy. Just to kind of like have a chat with you.
Well, let's just, jump straight into it. The topic that's been an ongoing trend for the past 2 or so weeks is mental health advocacy. We're trying to, break into the minds of advocates because, everybody has this whole separation between a mental health advocate and somebody who is, an everyday person. I wanted to demystify that separation so that, knowledge could be spread quicker. So the first question that I had on the roster was, what exactly are mental health and mental illness? I like using this question first just to get grounds on what we're talking about.
Yeah. So thanks for that. So we talk about mental health and of course mental illness, and these are like two phrases I would say that people interchangeably use. People refer to mental health as mental illness, and others refer to mental illness as mental health. These are like very, very distinct, phrases, and actually mean different things. Like for instance, talking about mental health, essentially talking about, mental well-being, and this includes, emotions, also our thoughts and feelings, and of course our ability to solve problems, and overcome difficulties, and connections and understanding of the world, I'd say. But when you talk about mental illness itself, these are like the negative effects of, I'd say, mental well-being. In short, I'll just say the negative outcomes, anything that has to do with disturbance in mood, thinking, and behavior. So I like to think about mental disorders or mental illnesses as essentially negative mental health. Think about you being a state, if you're positive, it's positive mental health, and negative mental health is essentially mental illness.
You're absolutely right. Most people, I always tell people, because they have this perspective on mental illness and mental health, that it's this mystified thing. When somebody has the flu, not to downgrade mental illness, of course, but when somebody has the flu, we treat it with the urgency that a disease has. But when somebody is afflicted with a mental illness, we seem to branch it off into so many inaccurate ways of thinking about it, and it doesn't make sense in my mind, especially because it's something which can be assailed in such a honest manner, as opposed to maybe a virus or something that takes a good long time to break down. A good deal of mental illness, especially with individuals, is really centered on them. And I really never understood the separation that comes between the idea of this person's afflicted with and any other illness. And on that train of talk, the next question was, what are some of the greater misconceptions about mental illness and mental health? In my opinion, if I can just hold you for a minute, one of the greatest misconceptions I found is that they're not actually afflicting people. I do a lot of reading. I like reading, and every time I look up the way mental illness affects the body, it is really shocking. When people go through things like depression, those heavy chronic depressive states, right? You can even see that there's hormone changes, hormone imbalances, in excess of the stress hormone like cortisol, causing a lot of damage in the system. And I wonder, why is this never considered as serious as maybe when somebody has malaria? It has the same killing effect. In fact, depression affects about 264 million people worldwide. So just hop on that trend. What do you think are some of the more pertinent misconceptions on mental illness?
Yeah. So when you think about, of course, mental illness itself, I like to think about it like it's basically an invisible pandemic. When you think about it, because it's so hard to actually know, because you only get to understand or understand person's mental well-being if they actually open up to you. You get the sense, right? But of course, there's some common symptoms that you can actually, kind of like just you can actually tell that okay, this person might be going through depression, something like that. But I think though misconception is that this one especially says stuff like some Zambians, of course, and it also depends on what population you're talking about, what country you're talking about. For instance, in Zambia, many of these things we talk about mental illness, people think it's something that has to do with and so anything that has to do with wizardry is probably something that cannot be treated. You get the sense, right? And so people tend to believe, go like, oh, when I'm low and something like that, And so that's a problem itself, and also there's this, of course, mental illness not being treatable. Some people think it cannot be treated, and so they don't actually, try to seek medication because they think something that does not exist. As a matter of fact, people think that mental illness is probably something that has to do with the Western world because most of the Western world is actually talking about it because there's been lots of research done on mental illness, I'd say. But this whole thing of people trying to kind of like I'd say find I'd say non-scientific or non-realistic causes of mental health really kind of like deters us from reality, and so it brings about all these misconceptions. People think that can be treated. There's wizardry. There's people who think that children are not affected by mental illness. Which is very funny when you think about it. Because mental illness has no, I would say, there's no bias. Let's say, there's just some correlations, of course, but it doesn't like it affects everyone equally. And so these are kind of like the misconceptions.
Every time I think of these misconceptions, it goes on a trend in my mind towards stigma. One of the things that I found most shocking is that in Zambia, our mental health bill only got changed in 2019. Before that, we're still using the archaic bill, which had derogatory terms and a lot of unsightly versions of what mental illness looked like. And I thought to myself, it took that long. It took over 50 years since our independence for us to have the conscious thought that mental illness is something serious, right? So if the whole country was working on that assumption, I can only imagine the negative effects that the stigma would have. I know that builds on to our next question, which is what are some of the negative effects of stigma? When somebody is suffering from mental illness, what this stigmatization we see, the perspectives that have been carried, the cultural norms and cultural perceptions that have destroyed the idea of mental health. What do these stigmas actually do to people? That's like a solid question. What's the next one up?
Yeah, it's very unfortunate that the government itself does not prioritize mental health and does not support mental health initiatives. And of course, everyone knows that in Zambia, like we have very few mental health care centers. That itself is a problem. And the fact that policymakers are not prioritizing, mental health care itself, that's really a problem because it kind of like mystifies the essence of mental health. So people don't talk about it, so people are like, what the hell is mental health? So it really becomes a problem, and I think it all comes to stigma itself. And I think stigma has really it has like a very like deeply entrenched like effect, and who knows, the fact that people are not really kind of like prioritizing mental health might be because of stigma itself, and so the negative effects of stigma, anything, I just think about stigma like as you said, in the other bill, there were like derogatory terms, used against people with mental illnesses, or say mental illness victims. The very I think interesting thing is that some people actually don't know that they actually stigmatize mental health when they're actually saying it, um, and so it really becomes a problem when you think about it. I think one of the things that we actually did, the Mental Liberty Foundation, during its founding, of course, we wanted to make sure that we destigmatize, mental illness within ourselves at first, so we kind of like identified, I'd say different ways in which people can actually, reinforce stigma, so we say, okay, don't say this, don't say that, maybe call someone a mental illness victim and not a mad person. You get the sense, right?
Yeah.
And of course, one of the negative effects that we actually, among the numerous negative effects that we identified, stigma itself exacerbates mental illness. When you think about it, it causes depression, as we say. When someone has, let's, think about autism, and, someone has autism, and every time people kind of like stigmatize the person, making them feel bad, they get depressed. You get the sense, right? And so you have autism and depression occurring at the same time, and so you have mental illness being exacerbated, and that itself is a problem because all these negative effects kind of like just converge, and they just have like this, I'd say, elevated effect. Stigma itself leads to suicidal ideation. People are committing suicide because there's so much stigma. People, when someone is going through some mental illness and people are just saying, or using all sorts of derogatory terms, and of course, saying weird stuff like, maybe, wizardry and everything, maybe you caught something, all that kind of stuff. People become depressed, and that leads to suicidal ideation. As a matter of fact, I did know that suicide is a very common thing. Till kind of like we ended up funding the Mental Liberty Foundation. And what the most interesting thing is that people have been reaching out to us and telling us, I'm having suicidal ideation and everything. And so I was like, wow, this is very common. So stigma causes that, and there's also this thing of of course, stigma prevents people from seeking medical treatment because they don't want to open up, and if you cannot open up, it's very, very hard for you to actually get advice. So most people just keep it within themselves, and mental illness just keeps on getting bigger and bigger, and then the effect just becomes overwhelming, and it becomes hard to actually cope. And of course, stigma itself reinforces mental illness stereotypes, because people always just talk bad things, and people believe in those bad things, and those are kind of like also adopted in the mainstream culture. And this is very common in Zambia. That in Zambia, so much stigma in Zambia, and this is really something that we actually need to eradicate. We need to destigmatize mental illness and, of course, mental health itself.
One of the things that I find interesting about the mental health narrative, when you contrast it along a lot of things, along economical lines, along gender lines, along racial lines, right? One of the things that I find, most prominent and most intriguing is that showing any sign of mental fatigue is seen as weakness. It's actually very ironic because we as human beings, generally, we're not perfect creatures. We need rest. We need to be cared for. We need to actually check on ourselves. We don't run like machines. We tire, we wear out, and especially mentally, right? So I find it interesting that even though, a good deal of people do know this, it's one of those things which is hard grained into our culture, that if you show weakness, if you show sadness, if you show this, if you show that, that means that you're not actually handling life right. When ironically, it's more healthy to cope with those emotions. For example, right, I was having a conversation once, and I had been talking to somebody I know, and I had suggested to them maybe you should see a professional, right? And their immediate reaction, even though they knew that there was something that needed to be done, was to recoil, because they thought, if I can't solve this on my own, then I have a problem. But the irony of it is, we do have a problem and we do need help solving it. So, as Zambians, right? How can we, move away from that hard set cultural way of thinking? Is there a way, we can separate ourselves from it? Because as we've seen, the kind of culture we've been developing, especially since our independence, has been one which has perpetuated and exacerbated the negative ideas, stereotypes, and results of mental health and stigmatism. So, how, on a cultural level at least, can us Zambians kind of deviate from that norm we've established?
Yeah, it's very sad that people tend to resist the fact that they need medical attention when it comes to mental illness, and this all comes, of course, to the culture itself. The culture reinforces, reinforces the whole. I'd say it essentially just makes everything worse. When you think about it, the fact that people cannot seek medication is a problem, and the fact that you actually mentioned that people say, and I'm assuming the person you talk to is probably male, right?
Yeah, they're absolutely fine. I made practice.
The fact that it's male. Look, one thing that's really interesting is that in Zambia, most people think that as a man you have to be strong. You cannot be affected by mental illness, and this is very interesting. The fact that you had that conversation with a friend, just it shows that it shows that toxic masculinity is actually it exists. Even like in daily discourse, like just normal conversation and everything. You talked about this dude like being strong. Like most, as a man, like you don't have to succumb to like mental illness. Like, why are you depressed, saying, man? Like, you have to be strong. That itself is toxic masculinity. And there's this lot, yeah, like toxic masculinity is deeply embedded in like Zambian mainstream culture. It talked about really, really makes things worse. And so, as Zambians, number one, we need to eradicate toxic masculinity itself, because mental illness has no, I would say, there's no racial bias or gender bias, nothing. It affects everyone equally. So people need to stop believing, stop. I mean, we need to kind of like eradicate toxic masculinity, and that's definitely something that won't really be very easy to do. But brings me to like one thing again. The way we can actually eradicate toxic masculinity, of course, is we need to recognize that mental illness exists. Just like malaria exists. We need to we need to understand that this is a common thing. This is a normal thing. The body, human body is prone to experiencing mental illness, and it cannot be once, maybe even several times. So we need to recognize that. And one thing that we have actually adopted as the Mentally Bad Foundation, we developed an approach, kind of like understand the whole mental health, how mental health is affected, especially when it comes to culture, because our mission is we're trying to use the culturally tailored approach to destigmatize, de-westernizing, and of course eradicate mental health stigma, mental health, related, I would say, stigma and all sorts of negative stereotypes. But the thing is that we have adopted an intersectionality lens. And what I mean by intersectionality, of course, is recognizing that mental health is affected by several factors. I like to think about a person's mental health. Think about that person, like the unique individual. Like, what are some of the factors that can actually influence your mental health? Like, for instance, the fact that you are male. In Zambia, the culture itself, we are prone to the effects of toxic masculinity. Number one, so that itself can be a source of mental health deterioration. Number two, where you're coming from, what kind of family are you coming from? Does a family recognize that mental health exists, or do they just reinforce, the stigma? They call you lazy because you're experiencing this. That itself is a problem, right? So there are like so many factors that, of course, influence mental health, and they all converge. And then have that, kind of like cumulative effect on mental health. So that, of course, is the intersectionality lens that we actually adopted, and this is something that is also shown in our logo. Our logo. If you see our logo, like we have those lots of different colors and everything, and we have everything that's committed, like the green crown. That itself is mental health. And so people need to recognize that there are so many factors that can affect one's mental health, and all these factors have like cumulative effects on one's mental health. And so when you apply the intersectionality lens, you tend to understand how maybe maybe between the two of us, who is more prone to experiencing mental illness. You get the sense, right? Just by recognizing those factors. And so this is really something that we've been trying to sell out. We're definitely gonna start selling out. We want people to apply intersectionality lens, make sure that we eradicate these cultural stereotypes in Zambia that are related to like mental health and of course mental illness as well.
All right. No, I find that interesting. The whole view of looking at it from a different lens. Looking at it from the different factors that affect each person, because as I was doing as I've been reading on this, because I always encourage people to do as much reading on this as possible, get as knowledgeable as possible, so that they can really understand what's going on. You find that a lot of people vary, especially as we are people, we vary a lot. Some people have a higher tendency towards neuroticism. They have higher neurotic tendencies. They tend to worry more, or take longer to adjust. Some people are more compulsive, more obsessive, and that doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything wrong with them. It's just, everybody exists on this spectrum of different personality types, and different people are affected in different ways. So what I have been encouraging, or the consistent thing I've been encouraging everyone to do as they've been tuning into Headspace, as I've been doing my own mental health advocacy activities, is to try and get a firm understanding of the environment you've grown up in. Like you said, our country itself has this very rampant idea of toxic masculinity, and it has this very rampant idea of the inability for people to come forward, right? And it seems like such a norm where we are, and those things tend to affect people from the time that they're young. We're shouted at if we feel pain, we're put down if we worry, we're this and this and this, and it makes it seem as if the idea of not actually knowing what you're doing, or being worried, or any of the things which are generally normal for people, is an act of retaliation to our norms, right? So I thought of this from the lens of an advocate. As advocates, we're also exposed to these things. Also, we also grew up in the same environments. All the advocates I know who live in Zambia have lived through a Zambian environment. They have seen how toxic masculinity works, or how the specific views that are brought about for each person in Zambia works on children, on men, on women. So, what I find interesting is that even though people are aware that us as advocates experience these things, they seem to imagine that we are aloof from them, that we don't actually get affected by mental health issues and mental struggles. So the next question was to really hammer down on the point what it actually means to be an advocate, because people seem to touch on to that view, the idea that we are immune to mental illness, as opposed to actually being human. So we should really clarify what it actually means to be an advocate. That was like the next question. What does it actually mean to be a mental health advocate?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think there's no, I would say, solid answer, but of course there are attributes that make one an advocate for mental health, and of course you need, as said, when it comes to Zambia, you know, um, and I think when it comes, you need to kind of like understand, of course, the culture which you want to, of course, as an advocate, you're probably going to spread mental health awareness. So you need to understand the culture itself, because there's several peer-reviewed research suggests that culture literally has direct effects on mental health, and so you need to understand that. And so Understanding the culture, of course, how that might influence mental health is very important as an advocate. You need to do that. You need to acknowledge, of course, it all starts. It all. I think this is actually universal. It all starts with acknowledging the fact that mental illness itself is real and affects everyone, even you yourself as an advocate. As you said, people think that advocates are like machines. They're not affected. Yeah, this is it's very interesting because yeah, even in the Mental Liberty Foundation, because we have some, the mental powers themselves, the advocates, and you're like, okay, you want to talk to someone who is like a mental health victim. Some of them are like, oh, I'm not really feeling well. Like, I might experience this and that. Like, I'm talking to this person. So sometimes you find that as an advocate, as maybe let's say you're trying to talk to someone like one on one, they tell you about the experience, and you also, yeah, you're also like negatively affected. So even advocates can be, but I think what's one thing I've actually realized, and this is very interesting, is that advocates are actually really bad. And one I've actually realized that most of these advocates are actually mental illness or mental illness victims. And so this is really interesting because they're actually giving back. They want to help others. So of course, that all comes to having empathy for mental health victims. As especially the fact that when you are a victim yourself, you also have empathy for others. You want to help others out. You want to teach them and tell them, oh, this is what I did. This is how I cope. And maybe I experience schizophrenia. Maybe like, oh, this is how I manage schizophrenia. Like, you want to teach others. So that's really important. Of course, advocates need to debunk the negative stereotypes of the mental illness itself. Debunk these stereotypes. Such as telling people that just because you have a mental, you have like a victim of mental illness, or you are like you have a mental disorder that doesn't make you violent. It doesn't mean that your life is doomed. So people need to do that. So that's kind of like one of the attributes of being an advocate. Of course, you have to be a mental power. And this is very interesting. I talk about mental power. I actually call the members in the Mental Liberty Foundation, they're called mental powers, because they're like mental peers. When you think about it, like a peer support system. And I think as an advocate, you have to be a mental power. You have to be a peer supporter. You have to help others out. So there's this, provide mutual help. Be there for others. Be considerate, and also be understanding. Because one thing that's very common is that most mental illness victims are not understood, and so it really creates a problem. Maybe someone is going through some, I'd say, mood disorder, and people will be like, "Oh, this person is so moody and all that," and they'll have all those, negative things about them. The thing is that you have to be understanding as an advocate, so you really need to be, I'd say, compassionate. It's all about compassion. Be there for others.
So, I've had this conversation with a lot of other advocates. I've had it with the public relations officer at Chainama. I've had it with some of my friends who run a podcast for mental health. The idea of community help. Every time I've had this conversation, I found that we can create better policies. We can, make a better healthcare system. But if somebody who has been suffering from mental illness goes into an unforgiving community, they are more likely to relapse. Because what I found as I've been talking to people who are struggling is that the place which is most chaotic for them isn't in, let's say, a hospital or in front of a therapist. It's the issues that come when you're in your community, in your home, around the people who know you. The thing is, most of us usually combat things outwardly. We're like, oh yeah, we need to change the environment around us, but we don't actually look at our own communities. So what you've said is actually really interesting, that we need to try and forge a sort of internal understanding. I'll give an example. Bipolar disorder, right? It's one of those really, really, really specific mental illnesses, and it has this whole spectrum. It affects different people differently, and when some people are manic, they're really happy. When some people are manic, they're really overactive and probably destructive. When some people are in their depressive moods during bipolar disorder, they can't eat, can't sleep, can't do anything. When some people are in their depressive moods, they just completely shut out the world. So it's one of those really niche mental health disorder, mental illnesses. And what I found is that every time somebody's experiencing it in our culture, we're just like, oh yeah, this person is just moody, or this person is just this. And we don't actually try to verse ourselves with the idea of exactly what's going on. You know, the biggest killer, especially as an advocate, as somebody going through this, or as an advocate, or both, because those things are not actually mutually exclusive, is the fact that we don't forge that understanding amongst people, right? We just leave it to a certain group of people, and the rest of the community is like, oh, those people handle it. Oh, the people at Chinama will handle it, or oh, this group of mental health advocates will handle it. But advocacy doesn't need to be, oh yeah, I'm pulling people together and forming an organization. Advocacy is just, oh yeah, I'm spreading word, I'm saying this about mental health, I'm improving my mental health, I'm being less judgmental, I'm being more compassionate, I'm being more helpful, I'm contributing daily, I'm stopping my friends from using derogatory terms for mental health. And it's this consistent feedback loop of how people just want to take away the responsibility in the community from themselves. I found that being a mental health advocate and being mentally well are not synonymous. They aren't synonymous, and the fact that people assume they're synonymous is kind of sad, because most people who are advocating usually have a story of their own to tell. They usually have a very personal connection with the desire to help others, a very personal inbuilt need to change the things around them. So I find that we need to create a sort of internal system. It's everybody can be and should be an advocate. Not everybody is built to make a video and talk. Some people are better at drawing people together. Some people are better at just getting information around. Advocacy doesn't need to be just a flashy statement somewhere which is large. It's just the simple things we do to try and reduce the stigma on a communal level, right? So, with that being said, one of my favorite quotes is, when you look into the abyss looks back at you. It was said by a German philosopher. The reason why I like it is because it explains mental health advocacy and generally going through a mental illness in its entirety. You're looking at things that are hard to look at, the things that people are going through. And you, being a human who's compassionate, also has things to struggle with. So it can also look back at you and have weight on you. So one of the main reasons why I wanted this to be a series, or I wanted this to be part of the series, is because I wanted people to realize that the whole mental health advocacy thing is something larger than just one person or one organization or one set of organizations. It's something that we all have to look into, because no one person can just directly look into the abyss of the things that have gone wrong or the things that are affecting people and hope to carry it and bear the weight of the world. So, on that trend of all of us being able to be advocates, if we understand the culture, like you said, if we really have empathy and compassion for the people around, what do you think is the best way to spread information, or the most potent way to stop this flow of misinformation about mental health?
Yes. So I think you provided a very, very rigorous description of course, advocacy itself. I think it's really important because people need to know that advocacy. They need to understand it in detail, and I think one thing that you actually mentioned, the fact that I think you implied the fact that people need to work together to become advocates. I think working together really brings about this form of I'd say powerful cumulative effect. You think about it. And of course, everyone who is a mental health advocate is essentially trying to do the same. We want to do the same thing. We want to raise mental health awareness, and so it's really important that we work together. And so those are really important things that you talked about. And I think, of course, as an advocate, the different ways of spreading spreading awareness of mental health itself, and of course mental illness. So you can, for instance, spread mental illness facts, such as, of course, as I always say, it's not anything to do with mental illness. It's not about wizardry, and it doesn't mean that when you have mental illness then you're mad. So that's pretty wrong. People need to know that. And I think it also comes to the fact that one thing I've actually realized that most, and I think this is very common. When people say mental illness, people just think it's just one thing. When you think about mental illness, they think it's just being mad. And this is very interesting because when you look at diseases like in general, like diseases that are not like mental illness, people know what malaria is, they know what tuberculosis is, they know what AIDS is, but most people don't know what schizophrenia is. They do not know what major depressive disorder is. They don't know what all sorts of traumatic experiences. They don't know that. They don't know what autism is, and I think that itself is a problem because people tend to generalize mental illness and just bring it down to badness, and so that itself is a problem. So, as a mental health advocate, you need to spread awareness of mental health by telling people that you cannot generalize mental illness, the different types of mental illnesses, and you must acknowledge uh, those different types, because it's really important because it helps people know what they're going through, and of course, it just breaks the stigma. So that's really important. And of course, you have to, of course, work together like platforms such as your platform, and of course, the Mentally Bad Foundation itself. So you can either just join them or support them, or maybe participate like in this session. You can maybe have people, this itself is advocacy itself. Just me participating, you talk is advocacy itself, and so we need to encourage people to participate in such discussions, and of course just support organizations that are working towards spreading awareness of mental health. And one thing that I've actually realized that, and this is very, very important, to be honest, when I think about it, I've realized that youth are actually taking this responsibility of spreading mental health awareness. We have youths like you who are doing that. We have lots of youths in the Mentally Bad Foundation, and probably there are other youths out there in Zambia that are doing that. And one thing I've actually realized, it all comes to realization that mental illness is a real thing. And when you think about it, past generations, of course, past generations didn't really acknowledge mental illness, and so there's this, and also I think maybe it comes to media. Maybe, people are watching what others are doing, and people in the USA are spreading mental illness awareness, so people in other countries are doing that, and so youth are actually emulating that, and this is very important, and this is probably our target. Like as the Mentally Bad Foundation, we're really focused on youths because we believe the youths will spread the knowledge, the growing generation, they will pass on the knowledge. So that's really important, and so it's really inspiring to see youth do that. So of course, these youth advocates, of course, they're educating people about mental health itself, spreading that. It's really important. Of course, they're providing mutual help. Mutual support is very important. As a matter of fact, when you think about Zambia is a very under-resourced country, especially when it comes to like mental health wise. And in countries that are under-resourced, you tend to realize that mutual help, peer support systems are very effective. Why are they effective? Because they don't require so much specialization, or it just requires for you to be there for someone. Listen to people, listen to someone, let someone tell you about the experience, and give them good advice. And one thing that we're actually trying to do as the Mentally Bad Foundation is we want to start recruiting, I would say, a cohort of like peer supporters. We want to be giving them certificates. Probably gonna partner up with other, of course, mental health care providers. We want to make sure that people become peer supporters, and I think that's really important because we want to overcome that challenge that Zambia is facing right now. Because mental health resources are we don't have that much mental health resources in Zambia, So the only way that's probably feasible is, of course, peer support systems. And the good part is that once you deploy a peer support system, you can go on Facebook, whatever, in platforms and everything. It's very quick and, of course, very feasible. And so, yeah, as an advocate, just do that, be there for others. I think that's what people should actually do to spread awareness of mental health, mental illness.
What one thing you really said has stuck with me, the idea of peer support. You know, what I don't think a lot of people fully realize this, but Zambia is a predominantly young country in that we have a lot of youth. The higher percentage of our population is composed of youth, right? And because mental illness and mental disorders don't necessarily discriminate, it's kind of on us as the youth in Zambia to try and push for change or try and create a better situation for the time that comes after us. There are oftentimes I have discussions with my family about better ways to understand each other. I try my very best to be the kind of mediating voice because what I want is for us to reach that point in life where we understand what someone is going through is entirely is entirely affected by everything around them. One of the things that I find interesting about mental illness and mental health in general is that there's so many factors that go into it. Your genetics, your environment, there's just so many things that come to do with a lot that come to do with a lot of this. And most people, like you said, have just boiled it down to something so minuscule. What I believe is the best way to handle it is to try and bring to each mind and each person the idea that these things that are affecting people are real, they're solid, they're actually affecting people, and each person goes through it in a completely different way. Human beings, unfortunately or fortunately, however you want to see it, exist on a whole spectrum of of mental health and mental illness. So each person needs us to kind of fill the gap between them and how they can get there, right? And like you said, Zambia is under-resourced in terms of mental health, so that peer support system is what really matters. And I feel like that's the truest form of advocacy, especially in our country. It is amazing if you go out, if you're putting up flyers, starting YouTube channels, if you're bringing up organizations, it's amazing. But what really brings it down to its core is being able, just where you're seated, where you are as a person, to understand the person next to you, right? To understand the person, that this person is going through something which maybe I might not have gone through, but I have the compassion to close the gap, right? And I think another thing, I just need to repeat this because I firmly believe in this. The best way to do this is to educate ourselves. When I was diagnosed with epilepsy, the ensuing events afterwards got me thinking about how little I actually understood about what was going on with me, about what would happen to me. And just make this clear for anybody who would be watching this video for the first time, epilepsy is not counted as a mental illness, it's a neurological disorder. It is almost entirely genetic. There's nothing mentally wrong with me. But one of the things that I found is that not very many people understood that difference, so it got lumped together. So one of the key steps, I think, is to aim to educate ourselves. As people, this information is accessible. Read about it, absorb the information, be the peer support right down the middle to fill that gap which we're yet to build in terms of resources. Yeah, that's my take on
it. Yeah, and just to add on that, it's it's really interesting that when you think about it, that if you look at the school curriculums, people never mention mental health. I went to GK, I never mentioned it. I never learned anything about mental health, which is very interesting. When I think about it, and to be honest, I claim to be a biology guy. Love so much biology. Guess what? Someone asked me mental illness, I didn't know anything. What is mental health? Nothing. But someone asked me, oh, where is the cerebellum? I'm like, oh, it's here. But what is mental illness? So what is mental health? Nothing. The fact that there's this absence of mental health, the mental health talk in, at the school level, you know, is just so devastating when you think about it. We need to make sure that we integrate, of course, mental health knowledge in the school curriculum. I think that's really important. Starting from grade one, if possible, people should know that there are mental illnesses, there's mental health. People should know that, not just because when I was in grade four, I knew that there's AIDS, there's malaria and everything. I did not know that there's, schizophrenia. I probably even not being able to like pronounce what schizophrenia is necessarily. But the thing is that there's this, like, there's zero, like literally nothing at all in the education curriculum. It's really important. It's embarrassing, to be honest. When you think about it, it's really embarrassing. We need to integrate that. And right now, of course, probably the best thing to do is go, to those schools, do some outreach. We're actually planning to do that as the Mentally Bad Foundation. Teach students what mental health is. And this is very important, I say, when it comes to, people taking, people like in their examination classes. That's probably the time people are mostly stressed. And of course, people might be failing because of stress. They can't handle that. So how do we help people out? So we need to go to schools, deploy that information, deploy the knowledge, and of course, just integrate it. So that's really important. But it's really embarrassing that even as much as I graduated from GK, I never knew anything about mental health. It's very funny. So it's pretty.
I every time I have conversations like this, I like contrasting other systems and the way other systems work. At schools, at most of the schools we have, right, we have dedicated people for so many things, for the sciences, whatnot. But our school system lacks the concept of a guidance counselor, for example, right? Which is something, ironically, I found in a lot of school systems, whether they are European, American, even South Asian, there's this consistent need to have somebody who is trained to guide and to talk about the struggles that may happen within a school, right? Who is trained to recognize, oh yeah, this child has a higher tendency towards narcissism, so maybe they're more prone to depression or more prone to this. There are people whose actual job in the entire school setting is just for that, right? But it's never been institutionalized to do that. The last time I had a conversation with somebody from the Curriculum Development Center, they were talking about all these things about, putting a new addition to this curriculum, doing this. But one of the things that always used to click at the back of my mind, even though I wasn't there exactly on that business, is why is there no mention of let's institutionalize the idea of teaching kids that they need to be mentally healthy? Why not add one more paragraph in the biology textbook about mental illness? I mean, the textbook gets updated every year by the same people. So I thought to myself, why not say, oh yeah, why not add a whole topic about stress hormones and their effects? We learn about adhesion and cohesion in plant vessels. I feel like it would gain a lot if that was added. And I totally agree with you, actually, on this point, because I find that one of the biggest issues with most people, the biggest issue with assailing mental health issues around us, is the distinct lack of knowledge, right? I'm not going to be the struggle isn't even with people per se, because it's not that people aren't receptive. The struggle is with the ignorance of the concept and the problem of it. No one from the time that they were learning was told that this is a disease. No one was told, oh yeah, my increased apathy or my lack of appetite or my excessively depressive thoughts for a prolonged amount of time are symptoms, right? No one was told that shifting from being happy to being sad and back and forth might dictate that I might not have a correct balance of moods at a certain point in my life. Nobody was actually told that, what, some people just tend to be more neurotic, so there's nothing actually wrong with you, or some people tend to be less focused, or some people are overactive. Nobody was actually told this is the way the human brain works, and sometimes there are things that happen and you have to understand what's happening, right? the sharp lack of knowledge really, unsettled me, because I could be having these conversations and I would expect, oh yeah, obviously somebody does know that depression exists and anxiety exists, and that people are like this and like this. And every time I'd bring it up, people would be absolutely surprised. They'd be like, oh yeah, this is a thing. I'm actually, there's actually something that might not be okay. So, I agree with you. The gap in knowledge is something that's really hard set. That's a really hard set problem, and I don't even feel like people are the exact issue, because people don't seem to be pulling it off as if they hate people who have mental illnesses, or they just don't like the concept of being mentally aware. It's just a very distinct battle against ignorance.
Yeah.
One of the solid conversations I really do remember when I was first starting this out. The first time I ever told somebody I was epileptic, they looked at me, right, with this face, because they didn't really understand what was going on with me, and they thought that there was genuinely something wrong with me. They thought that I was genuinely going to lose my mind, and I had to spend a good amount of time dissecting what a mental illness is, what a neurological disorder is, what this is and what this is. And it shocked me to my core that people just didn't know, and that it's not even their fault that they didn't know. Nobody actually thought to mention it to them, right? So, I agree with you. The education gap is something that's really, really hitting home on what's not going right.
But this is very interesting because the lack, what you've mentioned right now just shows how much work we need, how much work there is we need to do as youth, as youth who are interested in spreading mental health awareness. We need to go to schools, spread this knowledge, teach our friends, even universities, like people don't even know about mental health, whatever. They don't know anything about that. And I think what's really important as well, as much as we're teaching, mental health, spreading the awareness of mental health, we also need, and I think this is probably the most important thing, we need to teach people how to overcome or how to cope with mental, illnesses. People need to know how to kind of like, they need to understand that, okay, so how do you prevent getting to like the worst position? You need to detect the common signs of like maybe mental breakdown. People need to know that. People need to know how to handle these mental illness. I think that's really important. So spreading mental illness, mental health awareness, and coping that up with, of course, how to handle, of course, the mental illnesses, or how to stay mentally fit. How to be, mental, how to enhance mental well-being. People would really think about, but don't do that. How do you make sure that you're always in the right state? How do you make sure, exercising, all that sorts of stuff? People don't know that. We need to do that. So there's lots of work that needs to be done, and I think the government needs to help us out, to be honest, when you think about it, because there's lots of things to do, and it's going to require so much resources. It's going to require mobilization of people, and we need that. So it's really interesting that that there's this, of course, lack of mental health talk in schools, but of course really gives us a chance to be pioneers, to be trailblazers, so we can make a huge difference right now.
Yeah, I am in full agreement with you. There's a lot that does need to be done, and I'm glad we could have this conversation. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule. The whole time difference thing was a really insane thing to juggle, but we managed it. And I hope that this isn't the last time we'll be having conversations like this. One of the plans I have moving forward with the series and generally my own mental health work is to try and set up a sort of maybe monthly or bi-monthly forum to have a larger discussion on these things, make it more open to the public, just so that things can, disseminate as quickly as possible, having people from all areas on mental health advocacy just talking this through. And when I iron out all the kinks, I'm sure that I will, call you up for this. It was nice having you, Michael. I
Have my full support. As a matter of fact, next week we're starting a talk show on social media pages. We call it the Mental Power Talk. We're going to be talking about mental health. So, we probably want you to speak to us at some point. So, you're probably going to be in my position one time, but of course, there's going to be other people, talking about this. But yeah, but to be honest, you have my full support, and I know I have your full support.
Of course.
And this is really working together. This is really, really important. It just shows that we are people who've noticed something that's right, and we want to create change, and we need support. So
All right.
thank you very much
All
for
right.
the invite, and it's really been amazing to talk to you.
So just to recap, I've been talking with Michael Moyo. He is one of the founding members of the Mental Liberation Foundation, the Mental Liberty Foundation, excuse me, and he has been actively working for mental health. From the first time I ever met Michael, he's always been someone who's caught me as really dedicated to his goals. So I'm happy that I get to work with him on this. I will make sure that in the link for this video there is, their Instagram and such, can see exactly what they've been doing since they were founded. Thank you again, Michael, for having this talk with me. Have a good day.